The journey beyond the mountains. In a realm where the sky stretched endlessly like a painted ocean of light and shadow, there stood a vast chain of silver mountains, their peaks piercing the heavens. These mountains were older than memory, older than the oldest songs whispered by the wind. Snow crowned their summits year-round, glowing faintly under starlight, while rivers of melted ice carved their way through valleys below like veins of crystal. Above these mountains, dragons ruled. They were creatures of legend and power, beings of fire and storm, of wisdom and fury. Their wings could darken the sky and their roars could shake the earth itself. Each dragon bore scales of vibrant colors, emerald, crimson, gold, sapphire, each hue reflecting their lineage, their strength, and their place among the ancient clans. But among them there was one who did not belong. Her name was Leora's. She was an albino dragon, a rare being whose existence was often seen as an omen, sometimes of blessing, sometimes of sorrow. Her scales were not like the others, they did not gleam with bold colors. Instead, they shimmered with a soft, ethereal white like freshly fallen snow untouched by the world. In sunlight, she seemed almost translucent, glowing gently as though light itself lived beneath her skin. Under the moon, she looked like a spirit drifting across the sky. Her eyes were a pale, luminous blue, quiet, observant, and filled with a depth that seemed far older than her years. Unlike the others, Leora did not breathe fire. While young dragons trained to unleash flames that roared like thunder, Leora's breath carried only a faint mist, cool and gentle. Many saw it as weakness. Some whispered about her behind folded wings, calling her unfinished, broken, or mistake of nature. But Leora had long stopped listening. Because she had something far greater than fire. She had a heart that refused to give up. And that heart belonged, above all else, to her mother. Her mother, Elendra, was everything Leora was not. Where Leora was quiet, Elendra had once been a storm. She was an elder dragon, one of the oldest still living in the high ranges. Her scales had once shone like molten silver, each one edged with a faint glow that pulsed when she breathed fire. Her wings were vast, capable of stirring hurricanes with a single beat. Her voice could echo across valleys, commanding respect and silence wherever it reached. Stories of Elendra were told among the clans, stories of her soaring through lightning storms, of defending the mountain passes from invaders, of guiding younger dragons through their first flights. She had been strength, she had been power, she had been legend. But time spares no one, not even dragons. Years passed and slowly the strength that once defined her began to fade. At first it was subtle. A slight hesitation before taking flight. A longer rest after landings. A softer roar. But then came the changes that could not be ignored. Her scales began to dull, losing their radiant sheen. Fine cracks appeared along their edges like fractures in glass. Her wings, once firm and unyielding, trembled when she stretched them. And her breath, her mighty breath that once carried fire, grew shallow and uneven, as if each inhale was a battle she was losing. Leora noticed before anyone else. She always did. It began on a quiet evening. The sun had dipped behind the mountains, leaving the sky painted in shades of violet and amber. Leora had returned from a solitary flight, her wings tired but her mind calm. She found her mother perched on a ledge overlooking the valley. At first glance, nothing seemed unusual. Elendra sat as she always did, tall, composed, watching the world below. But something was different. Her breathings. It was too slow. Too strained. Leora approached carefully, her claws making soft clicks against the stone. "Mother," she called gently. Elendra turned her head, offering a faint smile, but even that small movement seemed to cost her effort. "I am well, my child," she said, though her voice lacked its usual strength. Leora didn't believe her. She stepped closer, pressing her head lightly against Elendra's neck. The warmth she expected felt weaker. "Your breath," Leora whispered, "it's not right." Elendra closed her eyes for a moment, as if gathering what strength remained. "It is only age," she replied. "Even mountains wear down, Leora." But Leora shook her head. "No," she said firmly, "this is more." And deep down she knew. Something was wrong. The days that followed only confirmed her fears. Elendra grew weaker. She stopped flying. She ate less. Sometimes she would sit for hours unmoving, her gaze distant, as though she were slipping into a place beyond reach. The other dragons began to notice. Elders from neighboring peaks came to visit. They spoke in low voices, their expressions grave. Soon the healers were summoned. Dragon healers were ancient and wise. They understood the balance of life, the flow of magic through scales and bone. They carried knowledge passed down through countless generations, remedies drawn from rare herbs, rituals performed under specific stars, incantations whispered in forgotten tongues. If anyone could help Elendra, it would be them. They began their work. Sacred herbs were burned, their smoke curling around Elendra like ghostly tendrils. Potions were prepared from crushed crystals and mountain flowers. Ancient runes were drawn across the stone, glowing faintly as spells were cast. Leora watched everything. She never left her mother's side. Not once. Days turned into nights and nights into days. The healers tried everything they knew. But Elendra did not improve. If anything, she grew worse. One night, as the wind howled through the mountains and snow fell in silent sheets, Leora sat beside her mother, her head resting against Elendra's side. She could feel the slow, uneven rise and fall of her breathing. Each breath felt like it might be the last. "Why isn't it working?" Leora whispered, her voice breaking. No one answered. The healers stood at a distance, their silence heavier than any words. Finally, the eldest among them stepped forward. His scales were dark, almost black, marked with faint lines of silver that traced his age. "We have done all we can," he said softly. Leora looked up, hope flickering desperately in her eyes. "There must be something else," she said. "Another spell, another cure, anything." The elder shook his head. "Her illness is not one we understand," he said. "It does not respond to magic." Those words struck harder than any blow. Not respond to magic. That was impossible. Magic was the foundation of their world. It healed wounds, restored strength, and sustained life itself. Without it, what was left? For the first time in her life, Leora felt truly helpless. She had no fire, no great strength, no ancient knowledge. All she had was love. And love, it seemed, was not enough. Days later, when even the healers had begun to withdraw, Leora sat alone at the edge of the mountain. The sky above was clear, filled with countless stars. The air was cold, biting against her scales, but she barely felt it. Her thoughts churned endlessly. There had to be something. Some way. She refused to believe that this was the end. That she would simply watch her mother fade until there was nothing left. "No," she whispered into the night. "I won't accept that." It was then that she remembered. A story, a whisper, a legend she had once heard as a hatchling. It had been told in hushed voices among younger dragons, more curiosity than belief. A tale of the world beyond the mountains. The human world. Dragons did not speak of humans often. When they did, it was with caution, sometimes with disdain. Humans were fragile, short-lived, and lacking in magic. But they were also different. They built things. Machines. Devices powered not by magic, but by thought, by design, by an understanding of the physical world. And among them, the story said, there existed individuals who could repair anything. Broken metals. Damaged constructs. Even things others believed beyond saving. One such human had been mentioned. A mechanic. Someone who fixed what could not be fixed. Leora had dismissed it then as nothing more than a story. But now it felt like the only hope she had left. Humans, she murmured. The word felt foreign. Dangerous. Dragons and humans had lived apart for centuries. There were no alliances, no friendships, only distance and an unspoken understanding to keep it that way. To go there was to step into the unknown. But what choice did she have? Stay and watch her mother die? Or risk everything for even the smallest chance of saving her? Leora rose slowly, her wings unfolding against the cold night air. Her decision was made. At dawn, the mountains were bathed in soft gold light. Leora returned to her mother. Elendra lay where she had been, her breathing shallow, her eyes half closed. For a moment, Leora hesitated. Fear gripped her heart. What if she was wrong? What if this journey led to nothing? What if she lost her mother far from home? But then Elendra opened her eyes. And in that moment, Leora saw something she could not ignore. Trust. Unwavering, quiet trust. It gave her strength. Gently, carefully, Leora lowered herself beside her mother. I'm taking you somewhere, she said softly. Elendra's gaze flickered with confusion. Where? She asked weakly. Somewhere different, Leora replied, somewhere that might help. Elendra did not argue. She simply nodded, because she believed in her daughter. With great care, Leora helped her mother onto her back. Elendra was lighter than she should have been. Too light. It made Leora's heart ache. She adjusted her wings, ensuring Elendra was secure. I will not lose you, Leora whispered. Then with one deep breath, she leapt from the edge of the mountain. Her wings spread wide. The wind rushed beneath them. And for the first time in her life, Leora flew not just for herself, but for hope, for love, for the chance to save the one who had given her everything. Ahead of her lay the forbidden world of humans. Behind her, everything she had ever known. She did not look back. And as she soared into the rising sun, one thing became certain. This journey would change everything. A bond beyond worlds. Morning arrived quietly. Not with the harsh glare of blazing sunlight, nor with the roaring winds that once swept across the mountains, but with something softer, something gentler. A golden light crept slowly over the edges of the small human town, spilling across rooftops, stretching along the winding road, and slipping through the open cracks of Armin's workshop like a silent promise. Inside, everything was still. For the first time in many days, there was no frantic movement, no desperate urgency, no restless clatter of tools striking metal. There was only breaths. Steady, alive. Elendra stirred. It began with a subtle shift, a tightening of muscle beneath her pale, worn scales. Then came a deeper inhale, one that did not falter halfway through, one that did not tremble as it once had. Air filled her lungs fully, easily. And when she exhaled, it was not with strain, but with quiet strength. Her body, once weighed down by invisible chains of weakness, felt different. Not as it had been in her youth. Not as powerful, not as unstoppable. But no longer fragile. No longer fading. Alive. Her eyes opened slowly. The world came into focus piece by piece. The wooden beams of the workshop ceiling, the faint smell of oil and metal, the dim glow of early morning light filtering through dusty windows. And then, Leora, the young albino dragon, lay close beside her, curled protectively, as she had been for days without end. Even in rest, her wings were partially spread, shielding Elendra from the world as if she could guard her from every harm simply by being there. Her breathing was uneven, not from illness but from exhaustion. She had not truly rested. Not once. Elendra watched her daughter for a long moment. There was something new in her gaze. Something softer. Something deeper. A quiet understanding of everything that had been given, and everything that had nearly been lost. Carefully, slowly, Elendra began to move. Her claws pressed gently against the wooden floor. Her wings shifted, the metal supports Armin had crafted catching the light in faint, shimmering lines. They were strange, foreign against her natural form, yet they did not feel like a burden. They felt supportive, balanced, as though they were not replacing her strength, but helping her remember it. She pushed upward. At first, her body resisted. Muscles that had grown weak trembled under the effort. But Elendra did not stop. She had not come this far to remain still. With a slow, steady motion, she stood. The wooden floor creaked beneath her weight. The workshop seemed to hold its breath. And outside, the town fell silent. Someone had seen. A child perhaps peeking through a crack in the door. A whisper spread. Then another. And soon people began to gather. They came cautiously, slowly, not with the frantic fear that had once driven them away, but with something else. Curiosity. Hope. They stood at a distance at first, watching through open doors and broken windows, their eyes fixed on the impossible sight before them. A dragon. Alive. Standing. Elendra took a step forward. Her movement was careful, deliberate. Each motion tested her strength, her balance, her breath. But she did not falter. The light of morning caught her form, illuminating the delicate blend of scale and steel. Her once cracked wings were now reinforced with fine metal structures, each piece shaped with care, designed not to restrain but to support. Her scales, though still bearing the marks of age and illness, seemed to hold a faint glimmer once more. She was not the same as she had been. She would never be. But she was something else now. Something new. Something that existed between two worlds. Behind her, Leora stirred. The shift in the air, the subtle vibration of movement, pulled her from her restless sleep. Her eyes opened slowly, unfocused at first. Then, they widened. Mother. Her voice was barely more than a breath. A fragile hope afraid to fully exist. Elendra turned. And for the first time in what felt like an eternity, she stood tall. Not as the unstoppable force she once was, but as something perhaps even stronger. A survivor. Leora rose quickly, her exhaustion forgotten in an instant. She stepped forward, her movements trembling not from weakness, but from overwhelming emotion. "You're standing," she whispered. Elendra lowered her head slightly, her eyes soft. "I am," she replied. Her voice was still quieter than before. But it was steady. That was all it took. Leora let out a soft, broken cry, the sound carrying everything she had held inside for so long: fear, pain, hope, love. She pressed her head gently against her mother's neck, holding her as if she feared she might disappear if she let go. Relief flooded through her. Warm, bright, overwhelming. For the first time since this journey began, she allowed herself to breathe. Across the workshop, Armin stood quietly. He had been awake for hours. He always was. Even when there was nothing left to fix, he found it difficult to rest. He watched the scene before him without interruption. Without pride. Without expectation. His hands were still stained with oil, small cuts and bruises, marking the effort of days without pause. His eyes were tired. But there was something else there too. Something lighter. Satisfaction. Not in what he had done, but in what had been saved. Leora turned toward him. For a moment, she simply looked. Really looked. At the human who had taken a risk. Who had faced something unknown and dangerous and chosen to help anyway. Who had worked without rest, without certainty, without reward. "Thank you," she said softly. Two simple words. But they carried the weight of everything. Armin gave a small smile, wiping his hands on a worn cloth. "Sometimes," he said, his voice quiet, almost thoughtful, "fixing something just means understanding it." Leora tilted her head slightly. Understanding. It was not a word dragons often used. They spoke of strength, of power, of magic, but understanding. That was something different. Outside, the townspeople had drawn closer. Their fear had not vanished completely, but it had changed. It was no longer the sharp, immediate terror of the unknown. It was softer, mixed with something else. They saw the way Leora leaned against her mother. The way Elendra stood not as a threat but as something fragile, something real. They saw the humans standing among them, unharmed. Alive. And slowly, their perception shifted. Not monsters. Not enemies. But beings. Just like them. A mother. A daughter. The space between their worlds, once vast and unbridgeable, felt for a moment smaller. Elendra stepped forward. Her movement drew every eye. Every breath. She approached Armin slowly, her massive form casting a shadow across the workshop floor. Even now, even after everything, the instinct to fear her remained. But Armin did not move. He stood his ground. Elendra lowered her head. Slowly, carefully, until she was close enough that he could feel the warmth of her breath. For a moment, the world seemed to pause. Then, she bowed. A dragon. An elder. A being of immense power and ancient lineage. Bowing to a human's. Not in submission, but in gratitude. A silent acknowledgement of something deeper than strength. Something earned. Armin exhaled softly, the weight of the moment settling over him. He did not fully understand what it meant. But he felt it. And that was enough. Time passed quietly after that. There was no rush. No urgency. For once there was simply peace. But Leora knew they could not stay. This was not their world. And though they had found kindness here, their home still lay beyond the mountains. It was time to return. Before they left, Leora did something unexpected. She stepped forward, her movements calm, deliberate. Then, with a gentle motion, she lifted one of her wings. Beneath it, hidden close to her body, was something small. Something glowing. A single scale. It was pure white like the rest of her, but brighter. Almost luminous. As if it held a piece of something ancient within it. Carefully, she removed it. The motion was slow, deliberate, not without pain. Then she placed it before Armin. "A gift," she said softly. Armin looked at it surprised. For the one who healed without magic. He hesitated. Not because he did not want it, but because he did not feel he deserved it. "I didn't," he began. But Leora shook her head gently. "You gave what you could," she said. "That is more than enough." After a moment, Armin reached out. He picked up the scale carefully, holding it in his rough, oil-stained hands. It was warm. Not like metals. Not like anything he had ever touched. Alive. He nodded. "Thank you," he said. "Not for the gift, but for the trust." Outside, the sky stretched wide and clear. The storm had long passed. Leora helped her mother outside. This time, Elendra walked on her own. Slowly, but steadily, the townspeople stepped aside, creating a path. Not out of fear, but out of respect. Leora spread her wings. For a moment, she paused, looking back, at the town, at the workshop, at the human who had changed everything. Then, she leapt. Elendra followed. Their wings caught the wind, and together they rose into the sky. Higher, higher, until the town below became small. Distant, but not forgotten. As they flew toward the mountains, their silhouettes blended with the horizon, two figures moving as one. No longer burdened by fear. No longer alone. And behind them, a story began. It spread slowly at first. From whispered conversations to shared memories. From the small town to distant places. A story of a dragon, a mechanic, and a bond that should not have existed. But did. Not as a tale of fear. Not as a warning. But as something else. A reminder that compassion does not belong to one world. That understanding does not require sameness. And that sometimes the greatest miracles are not born from magic, but from kindness.